fantasy break.
The Carolina Panthers going to be one of the most intriguing teams to watch in the NFL this season. Some people are really high on them, think that they're going to have a terrific season, and that Bryce Young to Tet McMillan is going to be a huge breakout duo waiting to happen. Others might say that it's where careers go to die. This season is where we will find out. Like I said, the Carolina Panthers are a fun team. Last year, we saw some improvement towards the second half of the season. First half, we see Bryce Young gets benched. Andy Dalton comes in. There's a lot of questions whether Bryce Young is still the guy. He comes back second half of the season, puts together a string of good performances that lands him the starting role for this year. And it's definitely a prove-it year for him. They go out, they take Tet McMillan at the 8th overall pick and invest even more in Bryce Young's stock. They've continued to build the O-line, having the most expensive offensive line in the league. They signed Chuba Hubbard to an extension, as well as bringing in Dallas 1,000-yard rusher Rico Dowdle from last season. And then on top of that, you still have 2024 first-round pick Xavier Legette on this team and 2024 undrafted free agent Jalen Coker as well, who is a player that I am excited to talk about. But this is going to be episode 14 of the 32-team series. If you haven't already, go check out episodes 1 through 13. We've covered so far the AFC South. Now we're on the NFC South, and then we have also done the AFC and NFC North. So definitely make sure to go check out all those episodes and make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts at Leatherbrains to get all the updates on when our episodes are coming out. And just so you can, support us as you always do, Brainiac. So appreciate everyone for tuning in today. We're going to start out, like I mentioned, with Bryce Young. Bryce Young, I'll be honest, I am really not that high on him as, a player. I think he provides winning football. I think that's kind of where the misconception comes. This is a fantasy football video, not a real life video. So we're not talking about whether or not Bryce Young's going to be able to pull together some game-winning drives or whether or not he's going to be able to win some of these games, but whether or not he's going to put good fantasy points in your starting lineup. And so last year we look at him, he had 2,400 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 9 picks. Now he did have 6 rushing touchdowns. So he does provide a lot more rushing upside than some might think. He gets out of the pocket a lot. Using those legs, we saw a huge performance in the last few weeks of the season, specifically the last 3 weeks, where in week 18 he had a 5-touchdown performance against the Atlanta Falcons that really raise the draft stock towards him. I think that's where a lot of people have the conception that he's going to be this great quarterback. Similar to how a lot of people are high on Marvin Mims this year, because in week 17, he won a lot of people money in best ball with a huge 30-point week out of nowhere where he had 2 touchdowns against the Bengals. And it's the recency bias of, what we saw out of them last and forgetting what we saw the entire season before that. So I do think Bryce Young is a good player. I think that he could be a solid quarterback in the NFL. But when we get to his projection, you're going to see that I'm not as high on him as other people might be. Chuba Hubbard had a breakout season last year, a player that 2 years ago I was very high on. And he had a good season 2 years ago, but he had a great season last year, which helped him ink that 4-year, $33 million extension. Well-deserved. He had about 1,200 rush yards, 10 touchdowns, along with 43 catches, but only 171 yards. He was statistically one of the worst receiving backs in the NFL last year. And I think that's, for me, why I am a lot lower on Hubbard than most this year. And I think the offense as a whole, I think this team could be a good team, and I think they could win some games. Good game management, good defense, good ball control, but I don't see them being this stat padding team. Rico Dowdle comes in, where he comes from the Cowboys last year, and he had 1,300 total yards on 4.6 yards per carry. And I think the more important thing is he was a great receiving back for them. He had 40 catches last year. And that's why when you pair that with the Trevor Etienne selection, round 4 pick out of Georgia, I think the snapshot that we saw from Chuba Hubbard last year in the high 80%, you're not going to see that this year. I think we're going to see more like a 60% or a 65. And Hubbard could still have good weeks. He's still going to be the bell cow back when it comes to the carries. But Rico Dowdle, like I mentioned, he was at 1,000-yard rusher. He proved that he can be a good back in this league. And I think especially on third downs, that's where he's really going to shine, and where Hubbard is unfortunately going to lose that value that makes, running backs great, and that gives you that upside. So I typically stay away from running backs that don't catch passes. And that's kind of why I'm a little bit out on Chuba Hubbard this year and why I think he could have some regression based off what we saw. Miles Sanders did depart from this team. And then you have Jonathan Brooks as well, who unfortunately back-to-back torn ACLs. And he profiled similar to the fact that I think the Panthers knew with Chuba Hubbard that you don't have any type of receiving back there. And Jonathan Brooks was a great receiver at Texas. And so the Panthers have continued to bring people in who are better third down backs. And I think people have to realize that with Hubbard, that they are continuing to bring in more backs every single season. In the receiver room, we have Tet McMillan, 8th overall pick. You're gonna say that I'm sounding like a broken record today with these players. But if you have followed my content at all this offseason, I am not a fan of Tet McMillan. Do I think he is a good player? Yes. Tet McMillan is a good player, and I think he will have a role in the NFL. Do I think he's a great player? No. Do I think he's an elite player or could be? I just can't see it. Now, I have grown a little bit more on Tet recently because of his production. Back-to-back seasons with 80 plus catches, back-to-back seasons with 1,300 plus yards, back-to-back seasons with 8 plus touchdowns. So you can't deny the production, but we can also say, I mean, he played at Arizona. The competition that he was playing in the Pac-12 and then the Big 12 was not the same as you might see in the SEC or the Big 10. I've never been a fan of receivers that don't get a ton of separation. And I think when I watch Tet McMillan, what I see out of him is I see a good player in terms of contested catchability, in terms of using his body and overall catch radius to make great plays, and in terms of having a very good combo of size and speed. But when it actually comes to separating and having an advanced route tree, I really wasn't seeing that on his film. I was seeing him be successful on a lot of routes and I don't want to call him a one-trick pony, but I really, other than crossing routes and streaks, did not see much out of Tet McMillan that makes me too excited. The next receiver on this team is going to be Xavier Legette, 2024 first-round pick. In his rookie year, he had about 50 catches, 500 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Was not great. I think a lot of people were down on him last year. Now, I think Legette is a decent player. I think that he has a lot more upside than people are giving him. Got a really good size-speed combo, similar to Tet McMillan. Very good at contact balance when it comes to after the catch ability, which I really like. And I still think he's a good player and is going to have production in this wide receiver 2 role on the outside across the field from Tet. So I think people are overlooking the situation and have Tet, so much higher than Legette. But in my opinion, I think the production, at least for this season, could be a lot closer than people think. In the slot, you have Adam Thielen, Mr. Consistent, 50 catches, 600 yards, and 5 touchdowns last year. People forget that Adam Thielen was a top 20 receiver, a top 5 receiver for the first 8 weeks in 2023 with Bryce Young as his quarterback. Bryce Young absolutely loves the slot. And so Adam Thielen is going to be the starter. This is probably his last year in the NFL. I think Thielen's a really good player, but he's obviously going to be due to miss some games. And I think that's where the biggest sleeper on this team is Jalen Coker. Undrafted free agent, from 2024, 32 catches, 478 yards, and 2 touchdowns last year. And you might say that doesn't sound great, but you have to understand the situation of being an undrafted free agent. Towards the end of the season, he became one of Bryce Young's favorite targets. And I truly think that he is a talented player. And I think if you are in a dynasty league or in a deeper format league, or even a best ball league where you're looking for some round 17, some round 18 value, if Thielen goes down, Jalen Coker could be a league winner in the slot just off getting 5 to 6 catches a game. And if he can get a couple touchdowns, he'll be a great player. So I think Jalen Coker, very underrated. A lot of people don't know him. He's not a big name guy, but I do think in a deeper league, definitely get him on your radar. The only other receiver that I think is worth mentioning here, Jimmy Horn, round 6 pick out of Colorado, getting a lot of hype in training camp. His route running, I think, is very good. He's a little small, but I just think it's going to be very hard for him to get on the field with the amount of receivers on this team. So he's not really a draftable player. I think if you're in a really, really deep league, you can stash him on your dynasty team. But other than that, he is not going to be relevant. In the tight end room, you have Jatavion Sanders going for about 33 catches, 350 yards, and a touchdown last season. Jatavion Sanders is a player that I liked a lot last year. I think his snap share could increase this year in year 2. And I think that he could become one of Bryce Young's favorite targets just for the consistency over the middle of the field. But with me not projecting this offense to be too great, I don't think Sanders is going to have that great of a season, but I do think his upside is very high at a tight end position that is, weak every single season. So I like Jatavion Sanders, excited what he's going to be able to bring this year. Day 2 pick last year, had some good games, dealt with some injuries, but excited to see what he can bring. Looking at some of the actual stats, the meat of this video, the fantasy football forecast, I got Bryce Young throwing for about 3,300 yards and 23 touchdowns. So as you can see, I just don't think that he's going to have too great of a season. I think that he'll be a better real life player than he will in fantasy. I have him as my quarterback 23, and that's actually above where he's going right now. He's going as the quarterback 27, and that honestly surprised me when I was doing these notes and I saw that. I'm not high on Young. I think the offense can be solid, and I think the reason the offense can be solid is, one, the O-line play is a lot better than people realize. They've invested, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the most money in the entire NFL on the offensive line. And then on top of that, I'm a huge fan of Dave Canales and what he's been able to do with Bryce Young coming out of Tampa Bay as the offensive coordinator a couple of years back. And I think that Dave Canales can draw up a very good scheme. And I think, while Bryce Young, I don't think is the most talented quarterback in the world, I think what you get out of Bryce Young is consistency and I think a high IQ quarterback. And I think those things bode very well if you're in a good system. We've seen what Jared Goff can do in a good system with the Lions. We've seen what Brock Purdy can do in a good system with the 49ers. Bryce Young might not be the flashiest player in the world, but he can make smart plays and those win games. So I think that with his rushing upside, I like him on a weekly basis. I like him in best ball. I don't think he's a great player for redraft, especially in one quarterback leagues, because I don't think you're ever going to be starting Bryce Young. I would be definitely very shocked if we said by the end of the season that Bryce Young has the upside to be a top 10 quarterback. But I do think the quarterback 27 price is good. Looking at the receivers, these projections, it seems a little crazy. Tet McMillan right now is going as the receiver 27 across all formats of drafts. I have him as my receiver 44, so a mid to low receiver 4. I think the volume will definitely be there. It seems like they want to get him the ball. He produced like crazy in college, but I mentioned it. I can't believe in the talent when I watched him on film. And I think a lot of people get mixed up into these training camp storylines of, you see a highlight that the Panthers post and everyone's like, oh, glazing Tet McMillan, so excited to see what he can bring to the table. But when you actually realize that, one, some of these corners he's going up against are never going to see the field. And two, making one play doesn't show the 5 plays potentially before that where he didn't get open. And so I think people have to look a little bit past the training camp stuff. And I'm not saying that good or bad, that's the reason to doubt Tet McMillan. But I'm personally not going to read too much into the training camp hype that he's gotten. Because on all these plays, you know what I've noticed? He's making some really nice catches, but he's not really getting open very consistently. And so that's kind of my biggest issue, is that the concerns that I had with him in college, it doesn't seem like any of those things are changing. It kind of just seems like he's still the same guy that we thought, which isn't bad. Like I mentioned, I think he'll still end up being a good player in the NFL, but I think that ceiling is capped, and that's why I'm staying away from him at all costs this year. I think in best ball, it's okay to get a few shares, of course, but I am staying away from him. Xavier Legette comes in next. I got him as my receiver 61. He's going as the receiver 72. He was a first rounder last season. Again, I think that difference between him and Tet, the fact that Tet's receiver 27 and he's 72, I just don't think that there's a 50 pick difference between the two guys. I think it's more like a 20 pick difference or a 30 pick difference. So I think Legette could eat into a little bit more of the production, but with how low volume this offense is going to be, I don't think Legette's a good player to have. I think he has good best ball upside if he catches some deep balls, but I think in your regular redraft leagues, he's not going to be a player that you're ever going to be able to predict when to start. And I think that's going to be the case with majority of receivers on this offense, is that Bryce Young is going to spread this ball around. There's a lot of options to throw to, and I think that could affect Legette's stock. But I do think that he is a good player and that he has potential to play a role. He's not an all-around receiver, but he definitely can play a role in this offense to be a very good yards after catch player. Adam Thielen, I mentioned, guy that I've loved for a while. He helped win me a fantasy championship last year with a 30-point performance in week 17. I got him as my receiver 75. He's going as the receiver 66. So I'm actually a little bit lower on him, but that's just because I just think that he'll miss some games. And when I project him, I just can't see him playing a full season. I'm worried about Jalen Coker breathing down his neck. And unless the Panthers are in serious contention and Thielen's having a great year, I don't see any reason why they're not going to start playing Coker a little bit more, knowing that Adam Thielen is on his way out at 34 years old and Coker's a really young player with talent. So if he started, I think Adam Thielen can be sorry, if he's healthy, I think Adam Thielen can actually be started in your regular redraft leagues because he has a lot of upside and a safe floor with his, getting, I think you can kind of rely on him getting around 5 to 6 catches a game if he's healthy. But I think with, relying on him to stay healthy, that's where the issues start. And so Jalen Coker comes in at my receiver 84. He's going as the receiver 96. And I mentioned already, if Thielen goes down, Jalen Coker is a league winner. And if it comes down to betting on whether a 34-year-old receiver is going to go down or not, when he has for a couple games the last few seasons, I'm going to be willing to take that bet in the 18th round of my draft. So in your redraft leagues, I would definitely consider taking this guy last round. In Dynasty, go get him because especially next year, he's going to be the guy coming out of the slot. And I think especially, if Thielen goes down, that is going to be a gold mine for fantasy production if Bryce Young is able to be the guy that we think he can be. Jatavion Sanders is going to be the last, pass catcher in this offense. I got him as my tight end 29, he's going as the tight end 33. He showed some flashes last year. Snap share is definitely a question because they have another tight end in Tommy Tremble, who they prefer to play on the run snaps and the early down plays when it comes to the blocking scheme. And so that is kind of an issue with Sanders, as his snap share might not be as high. He potentially misses out on some of those bootleg plays that are great for tight ends. But I do think that he has, with the hype that he's been getting in camp, because he has gotten a lot. He went to Texas, good player profile. I think he is definitely in best ball worth a shot at drafting, especially with a weaker tight end position. I think in your regular redraft leagues, no point in taking him. I think he's a good waiver wire guy if you're looking for a tight end. But in your dynasty leagues, especially, he could be a guy where if you do believe in this offense, you should believe in Jatavion Sanders. Looking at the running back room, I have the running backs and this team rushing for about a little bit over 1,900 yards and 15 touchdowns, which will rank about middle of the pack in the NFL. I have Chuba Hubbard as my running back 22. He's going as the RB 18. So I said I was low on him. I think since I made these rankings, I've become more low on him or lower on him. I'm putting him in that range because I think he's a durable player and I think he is a good player. And I think the Panthers are going to lean on the run. And when you have a good O-line, that's going to score fantasy points. But it's going to be almost impossible to be better than what he was last year at the RB 14. So I think if you're choosing between him and some of those other options in that range, such as Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, James Conner, Travion Henderson, any of those guys in that range, I think all those guys have much higher upside than Hubbard. They all have higher receiving upside, and they all, as players, have shown to have higher upside in the past. So I think that Hubbard, good player. I think he's safe. But when he loses that third down role and he doesn't have 40 catches this year, and maybe that shrinks to about 20, I think his value could go down if some of the rushing production also decreases a little bit. And then I have Rico Dowdle, who going as the RB 51. I got him as my RB 52. So I don't have him much higher, but I truly do think he could be more relevant than we think. Great receiving back, which is what Chuba struggled in. Very solid all-around player because he can do everything when it comes to running the ball between the tackles, catching the ball, pass blocking, everything in that range. So I think that he's going to be a good player, especially if the Panthers are playing from behind. He's going to be a guy that they can rely on those 2-minute drills. And is it possible that Trevor Etienne is the guy in the future to be the third down back? Sure. But I think this is Dowdle's chance to prove that he's a good running back and that he can maybe get a multi-year extension somewhere else next offseason. So I think that the hope with Dowdle, if you draft Chubbard, if you draft Chuba Hubbard, you should definitely draft Dowdle. He is a great handcuff to have. And I think in best ball, if Chuba Hubbard does go down, Dowdle becomes an elite handcuff where he's in a good offense, good offensive line, and reception and receiving volume. So I do think that Rico Dowdle is the player in this offense that I like the most at his ADP. But I think the offense as a whole, like I mentioned, I'm just a little bit lower. I don't see them being this high volume offense that everybody else thinks they will. I just can't see Bryce Young producing that. But looking at the strength of schedule for this team, they've got a pretty good schedule. For the quarterbacks and just the overall passing game, they have the 13th easiest schedule, right in the middle of the pack. So I think Bryce Young is one of those players where if you have a good matchup like the Atlanta Falcons or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you can play him. But if you see he's going up against the Eagles or against the Ravens, you're obviously going to sit him. Running back comes in at the 12th easiest schedule. So that looks great, a little bit above the average rate. And I think that's good for Hubbard and Dowdle because Canales with his offense is going to want to rely on the run. So that bodes well. Looking at the schedule, just seeing that with the receivers as well, it comes in at the 11th easiest. So you have all three with quarterback, running back, receiver, all in the top 13. And so I think you can kind of assume that because the Panthers also finished last place in the division, they're going to have an easier schedule and it's going to give them a little bit of an advantage in terms of having good matchups for their fantasy relevant players. So that does boost these guys a little bit. Not enough for me to really move them up my rankings though, but it does bode well for having some matchup based projections in terms of, middle of the season. Should I start this guy? Should I sit him? I think that's where having easier matchups is always going to bode well. And then at tight end, they have the second easiest schedule. And I've mentioned in past videos, I don't think it matters as much because with the tight ends, the snap share is going to be kind of wacky. You don't know how much they're going to play. On top of that, you also don't know who's going to be covering them. It could be an edge rusher, it could be an outside linebacker, it could be a safety, it could be a nickel corner. And so I think with that, you don't want to look too much into it. But I think with how it looks, their passings, their schedule looks really good for the production side of their passing game. Looking at their playoff schedule, week 15 in New Orleans against the Saints, great matchup. Should be a divisional game where the Panthers are competing for a playoff spot. They're going to need to win, and that game's in a dome, which means that they don't have to play outside. Week 16, they play at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Another good matchup where it's going to be a shootout if they want to compete in that game. We saw last year, week 17 against the Bucs. Bryce Young had a great week. Adam Thielen had 30 fantasy points. So Bucks Panthers is usually always a high scoring game, and the Bucks defense, they did not do much to improve it this offseason. And then week 17, they're going to be at home against Seattle, who also has a weaker defense. So they're not playing any good teams in weeks 15, 16, 17. I don't think that these matchups are anything special, but I do think that these are better than some of the teams that I've seen in the past. So I'd say their playoff schedule looks good. You're going to have to kind of see how these players are playing as of recent, in weeks 12 through 13 and 14 to really see how, whether or not you're going to play them in those important weeks. But these matchups at the beginning of the season do look good. And then before we just cap off this episode, let's just discuss some storylines. I think the main one is, how do these wide receiver snap shares work out with five, maybe even six viable guys? And will any of them bring back the draft value? If they do rotate as much as, they possibly could, these guys will not return their draft value. I think it's going to be hard for them to keep Jalen Coker off the field, and I think it's going to be hard for them to keep Thielen off the field, which means now maybe Leggett starts to lose some snaps. Maybe even Jimmy Horn comes in and he starts to gain some snaps. So there's a lot of guys. It's a crowded room. I think the only one that for sure is going to be on the field at all times is Tet McMillan. And so just keeping that in the back of your head. And then I've mentioned a few times, but is this team going to be better in real life or fantasy? And I just truly believe that the answer is real life. I could see the Panthers being 10-7 with Bryce Young having a very mediocre season. And that's just because, like I mentioned, good ball control, overall, 6-minute drive where you score a rushing touchdown. Maybe you don't do anything crazy. Maybe you win these games 24-14. You're not putting up these 40-point weeks like we'll see with the Bengals and the Ravens. But they could win games, and they have good coaching, and they did look better towards the end of the season. So it'll be very interesting to see how good this Panthers team is. This is going to be one of probably, I'd say, a top 3 to 5 offense that we are excited to see in terms of the hype surrounding them and the actual reality of outcomes that it could be. Hopefully you all enjoyed this episode with the Carolina Panthers. Definitely make sure to check out our last episode with the Atlanta Falcons. And our next episode will be with the New Orleans Saints, who are one of the worst teams in the NFL, but a team that I am very excited to talk about as well. Follow us on all of our social medias at Leatherbrains. You can see the tags below and give us some support. Let us know what else you'd like to see in these episodes and, other things that you'd like to see on the podcast as well. Hopefully you all enjoyed this episode. Keep pounding. We'll see you next time.
3, 2, Got a blast.
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.